Hello there, Daryl here. Thank you for downloading. On today's show, we have an MLS Cup final preview for you. Before we begin, I want to let you know that all of our MLS coverage is sponsored by Roughneck Scarves, the official providers of scarves for US Soccer, MLS, USL, and the NCAA. They are also now the official provider of Total Soccer Show scarves. That's right. If you go to roughneckscarves.com, spelled RUFF, you can find the official Total Soccer Show scarf. Thank you to Garrett Weiss, to Greg Leff, to John Maguire, to Nathaniel Malone, and to Jonathan Holmgren for tweeting pictures of your TSS Roughneck scarves at us. If you would like a Total Soccer Show scarf, go to roughneckscarves.com, spelled RUFF. Use the coupon Total Soccer Show, all one word, to get 20% off your order. Okay, theme music begins in 3, 2, 1, and... Hello and welcome to the Wednesday Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove, and in studio I'm joined by a man who, unlike the 2026 World Cup, is not expanding. He's in very nice shape. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
If only that were true. If only that were true. At least I'm not expanding by the weight of an additional 16 teams.
Exactly. Oh, you're playing so much soccer. We're both getting fitter. I'm sure of it.
I'm not so sure.
We're running around as much as Nicolas Ladero, who we'll talk about later in the show.
You're playing. I think I'm standing on the sidelines saying, up on your toes. In-step passing. More of that than running for me. But anyway. So
the news this morning that Rob Harris broke with the Associated Press was that Gianni Infantino has a new plan for how a 48-team World Cup could work. Right, so far we've had, the 40 teams with 8 groups of 5 or 10 groups of 4. And we've had a 48-team World Cup with a play-in round where 32 teams will play off to join 16 seeded teams. Yep. So a new option that he's now adding to the pile is 16 groups of 3. 16 groups of 3.
Yep. Yeah.
What was your initial reaction?
Confusion a little bit because I was curious.
It's so weird, right?
Well, I was curious if that meant that only 16, like the top team, would go through, and what it actually means is the top 2 of 3 would go through. Right. So then you have an expanded 32-team knockout round, which means I think you're somehow not going to have a longer tournament, is what he says, but I feel like you will.
And it's just occurred to me that this is Infantino's attempt to solve the idea of his original 48 teams play-in round. It's 16 teams will have one game and then go home, right? Which is a very disappointing World Cup after what will be 6 months of hype. Now every team will get at least 2 games. He's fixing the problem that he made, right?
Sort of, yeah. So to clarify,
he put his shelf at one key and now he's tried to fix it.
To clarify, the first one was you had 48 teams, 16 guaranteed to go through as seeds, and then you'd have 16 play another 16. The winner of those would then go in, and then you'd have the normal group stage, right? So I guess what you're saying is that was where you'd only have the 16 teams playing one game potentially. This new one, you've got I guess
everybody gets at least
2 games, right? But it's still sort of unbalanced, and that's my only issue with it, is that one of those teams, because you don't have the balance you have when you have groups of 4, where the 2 teams play at the same time.
The beautiful symmetry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And here what you're going to have is probably that middle team, whoever they are, Team B, is going to play the first game because it's going to be Team A versus Team B. Then Team B is going to play Team C, and then Team A is going to play Team C. So Team B is going to get a much shorter break than the other 2.
Someone's going to lose out, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to, I'm sure people will deal with it, but then you have travel situations as well. It's not going to be in Russia, obviously. It's going to be 2026, but if it's 2026 in the United States, Russia and the United States are both pretty big countries, and then you have a risk of Team A playing Team B in Seattle, and then Team B playing Team C in Tampa.
Maybe you could have an Eastern Conference and a Western Conference.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden
we'll model the World Cup on MLS.
And these are always going to be the problems when you expand. And I think we would agree. I'm not sure where you are. I'm not even sure where I am really. That expansion is good. Yes. And necessary.
I'm mostly into the idea that there are so many nations in the world, and the more nations get to go to a World Cup, the more happiness, at least temporarily, and some sadness, that spreads around the world. So I'm just into the idea of more teams qualifying for the World Cup.
Yeah, I think I am too. I think what I don't like is when you get into those situations. I like, as we talked about, the beautiful symmetry of the current setup, where you have top 2 teams go through, and that's it. So you have to be in the top 2. Once you change it into 2 of the 3, or what I think is probably more likely is 10 groups of 4. Yeah. And then you have a couple of the best third place teams are going to go through. I know that's how it was even as recently as 1994, but it's still less of like an aesthetically pleasing situation.
I agree, like to look at on paper, but it's still the World Cup. This is my thing, right? Eventually, you're going to like it anyway because it's still the World Cup. Unless they change it so that it ends up being like you can pick up the ball and throw it, then I think everyone's still going to enjoy the World Cup. That's my cold take, is it's all good.
I think I agree.
It'd be very hard to ruin it.
Well, see, I disagree, though, because by the same token, we had that same exact sentiment going into the Euros. And we were both like, no, it's going to be good. There's going to be more teams going through. It's going to be more drama.
Yeah.
And we would both agree that the group stages were boring. They were really boring.
Yeah, there were a couple of like dead rubbers towards the end.
And it's because teams knew that they could go through potentially as a third-place team. So you can really play defensively rather than try to go out and maybe get a result.
Do you think there are any lessons learned? Because do you remember seeing, I think it was Albania, celebrating after they got a tie in their last game? And they were like technically one of the third-place teams going through at that point. And then as a couple of other groups finished over the next couple of days, they were definitely out.
No, because I think by the same token, we knew then that it was very unlikely they were going to go through. Right. Because every other team just needed a draw.
So they were just celebrating having a chance.
I think so. Yeah. I think that they had kept their options somewhat alive. But I think that is my concern, is that when you have more teams in there who know that there's a chance if they get 3 good defensive performances, they've got 3 points. 3 points is probably enough to get you in the conversation, so you can sit back, put 10 behind the ball, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be as exciting.
Right.
Yes, it's the World Cup, but I don't like the idea of just being like, it's the World Cup, and therefore it will be exciting. I would like it to be like, it's the World Cup, and it's exciting soccer, and therefore it's exciting.
So, but here's the thing, right? We talked about the different options that have been proposed recently, right, for an expanded World Cup.
Yep.
I think part of the thing is, once you get away from a 32-team World Cup and you go up to 48 teams,
right,
it's going to have to be a little bit weird and uncomfortable and asymmetrical. And it's almost like, it was 24 teams for a while. 32 is, I think that maybe people who've only watched soccer in the last 20 years who feel like, oh, that's just the natural way a World Cup is. That's really just a stopping point as the World Cup has expanded, right?
Right.
So there's no point being a traditionalist about it, because if it was, we'd go all the way back to like the 30s. And do it like they did it then.
Yeah, but I think there's a line between being a traditionalist and being a person who wants it to be logical and sensical.
I get that too.
And if you're just expanding for the purposes of expanding, and it is FIFA. I mean, and that's the other thing, that like you can definitely couch it as, we want to incorporate more people, we want qualifying to be more meaningful, we don't want teams to just be knocked out right away.
Isn't it, I want more people to vote for me in this presidential election, so I'm going to promise more World Cup places so that the smaller nations will vote for me.
But it's also that more countries can go, so you're going to have more games, so you're going to make more money, and you can get more sponsors, and you get more individual sponsors from those countries, and you're going to make more money. I mean, and that's a big part of it too, is why you want more people, is because soccer's never been more popular than it is, so why not make some money off of it? And adding people is a good way to do that.
So maybe, I think, didn't you suggest this earlier when we met before recording, that if you're going to expand it, just go all the way to 64?
I mean, that's kind of logical,
because you want the symmetry so much, just go for it.
Yeah.
I kind of see the logic in that. Why not?
I mean, because the issue then would be obviously quality of opposition, but also the length of the tournament would somehow, I feel like that would be the prohibitive thing.
Yes, true.
It would probably, if you're doubling the tournament, you're probably doubling the length.
Hey, we did 6 weeks in studio with the combined Copa and Euros this summer. I could handle a 6-week World Cup.
Yeah, so let's just do it. 64 teams. Done. If you're going to expand, why not go crazy?
So FIFA will meet...
And incorporate more than a quarter of the countries on the planet.
FIFA will meet in January. The FIFA Council will meet to discuss these possible options for what happens in the 2026 World Cup. 2018, 2022, that's going to be as is, right? 32, because those bids are already signed, sealed, delivered, however that may have happened.
So congratulations to the 10 groups of 4 bid, which is going to win.
Why is that?
I think that's the logical one. In terms of, you're not changing the overall structure of the tournament, you're incorporating more teams, and you're going with a system that has existed previously where the best third-place team goes through.
It's also kind of the compromise, right? If some people are like, no, 48's too many, maybe we'll go to 40.
But it's also like the one that can kind of operate in the existing structure is what I'm saying. Whereas groups of 3 or a knockout round before you even start the tournament, or groups of 5, those are all things that, I mean, maybe have been done, but to my recollection, not recently enough that I can remember off the top of my head. So that's what I'm saying, is like I think it's probably just more like, we'll just stick with the usual format, add 2 more groups, and then we'll do some third place stuff. It'll be fine.
And I kind of agree. It will be fine. It's still going to be the World Cup.
I'm glad that you're ever the optimist, Mr.
Yeah,
Daryl.
you'll still watch, right?
Yeah, just maybe a little bit more cynically.
I'll be there to combat you. Today we're talking about a single cup game, MLS Cup final. It's this Saturday. It's Toronto hosting Seattle for all the MLS glory. It's going to be a first-time winner. We'll have a new MLS champion, and they'll either be from Canada or from the Pacific Northwest.
And I believe for the first time ever, none of the original MLS teams competing in the final. Pretty sure.
Columbus not an original team?
No, I think they're original. but they were competing last season. What I'm saying is this is the first time you won't have one of those teams.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
There you go. Trying to discredit the crew. How dare you?
Shall we get to Toronto versus Seattle? So I genuinely don't know who to pick in this game. After doing like all the research and thinking about how the two teams match up against each other, you can easily construct an argument for like one team's attack is definitely going to beat up on this defense and vice versa, and this formation is going to beat this formation and vice versa. And there's little variables that are going to decide which way it goes. I think the only thing I'm really confident about is that it's going to be an entertaining game.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone back and forth really like probably 5 or 6 times today as to who I think is going to win this. And I think a big part of that is because you don't have any real obvious injuries. Like Sebastian Giovinco went off. It seems like he's going to be okay. Ozzy Alonso had that sprained knee. That's a little bit... If there is one injury concern, that's probably it.
The injury concern is that either he doesn't play, which is obviously a problem, or he plays hurt,
and that's
which is likely. Also a problem, and he's not as effective.
Yeah. But even with that, we'll get to that in a bit, but it's still like I think you're going to have your ideal starting 11s for both teams, and it's not really like one team is necessarily built on one player.
Yes.
Now, Seattle, I would say, are more built on a couple specific players, but it's not like, if this player has a great game, then they'll definitely win, and if he doesn't, then they'll definitely lose.
Right.
It's
because Alonso, Ladero, Morris, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's very evenly matched in that regard.
So let's maybe just pick a few little... areas of the field that are going to be interesting to watch. The one that sticks out to me, first of all, is Michael Bradley playing for Toronto in this sort of... It's almost like a free number 6 role, right? He doesn't have too much defensive responsibility, but he's the deepest of that 3-man midfield in the 3-5-2 or 5-3-2, whichever you want to call it. In that hole, operating for Seattle is more than likely going to be Seattle's number 10, Nicolas Ladero, who's great at finding space and causing trouble.
Yes.
So... I mean, is Bradley going to have to just suddenly stop being a sort of, I want to call him the slightly clumsier Pirlo, and become a more defensive player?
I don't think so. I think that would be an ill-advised decision by Toronto coach Greg Vanney.
I agree too. I think that's a misuse of Bradley's talents.
And I think, if anything, they will actively try for that not to be the case. So
how would they do that?
I think what they'll do is try to make sure that Bradley isn't in any 1v1 battles with Nico Ladero, and that means... either one or two other Toronto players are going to be tasked with really paying attention to Ladero. I think it probably has to be 2. That's kind of how good he is and how much movement he has. I think the logical one there is Will Johnson. I think he did a good job against Montreal and is physical enough to kind of do some kicking here and there when it's necessary.
So Toronto have changed their midfield shape a few times. The most recent thing I've seen is Bradley is the deepest and the playmaker, and then it's like either Osorio or Johnson, and it's Cooper, who I don't think has been there that long, right? Cooper, the Panamanian, is the other central midfielder, and they're free to also attack. So are you saying that basically one of those other 2 central midfielders is going to come back and do the defensive work for Michael Bradley?
I think so.
Do the tracking Ladero work?
Unless, given that Seattle are probably going to be in a 4-2-3-1, unless you want one of your center backs to step a little bit more. But I think, again, that's ill-advised. You want to keep them kind of compact and central and not get stretched.
All right, you're Greg Vanney. What do you do?
I think I'd probably put Will Johnson on Nico Ladero and just say, stay with him.
Stay with him.
Yeah.
Get him.
To the extent that you can. Because even when Colorado paid specific attention to him, he was still able to play the ball in that eventually leads to the goal for Jordan Morris. So he can still find space because he moves so much. So man marking him with just one guy is a good idea, I think. But if you can put 2 on him and have 2 people really paying attention to him, I think that's all the better.
All right, we've been watching Nico Ladero, and he always seems to find space, right? And I noticed, say, Bernier, playing for Montreal, found space like between Toronto's midfield and defence just by being a little bit clever. And he's an older guy, right? He's in his late 30s. He's probably the same age as me. I see Ladero as more sort of constantly on the move.
Yeah.
So even like if Will Johnson tried to man-to-man mark him, he's gonna need an oxygen mask.
Yeah, I mean, and it also is going to mean that he's just going to drag Will Johnson all over the place, and then you have to compensate for that. That's what I'm saying. If you're going to do man marking, it's probably Will Johnson, but I think it's probably smarter to have both Will Johnson and maybe Armando Cooper as, again, actively paying attention to him, and if he comes into their zone of influence, then that's where they step.
I think it's going to be Cooper. I think it's going to be Johnson. I think it's going to be Bradley. I think they'll have to pass him around. I think they'll be passing Ladero around. I also think that Toronto's back 3, the defenders, Zavaleta, Moore, Hagland, I think they'll also have to pick him up as he goes. And I think it's going to be a team job of like playing hot potato with Ladero.
Yeah, I just
hot Uruguayan.
I just think that is a very dangerous solution to that, because if you have everybody responsible for him, you have nobody responsible for him.
Right.
Is basically how that works. And so, and again, we saw that time and time again in these playoffs, especially in the first leg against Colorado and against Dallas, Dallas, where he was basically able to just shred defenses because everybody is marginally marking him, and thus nobody is really paying attention to him as he runs through the defense.
It's just not fashionable to man mark anymore, right?
No, unless you're Pep Guardiola. In which case, it's still not fashionable. It doesn't go that well. So I think, it's probably wiser to have a couple people dedicated to paying attention to him, but not dedicating their overall game to him.
All right, so speaking more about Seattle's sort of attacking game plan and how Toronto cope with it, we'll flip it around later in the show.
Sure.
I'm also thinking about Jordan Morris. Right? So your options with Jordan Morris if you're Seattle are you play him through the middle, use him as a centre forward, let him try and get him to run at people, or play him on the wing. We've seen him recently play left wing, right wing, and we've seen him have some success there. Yeah. If you're Brian Schmetzer this game, where do you deploy Jordan Morris against Toronto FC?
I mean, I think you deploy him on the wing, and then you kind of compensate based on the mobility of Ladero and of Vasquez, right? Up top, or Valdez, excuse me. Nelson Valdez up top, not Vasquez. Valdez up top, and you kind of have them move around as they've done time and time again in these playoffs.
Vasquez is the badass in Aliens.
There you go. But you start him. Is he? Okay, yeah. And I think just based on how fast Jordan Morris is, and it really is easy to forget how quick he is until you see him blaze by a defender with the ball at his feet. That's especially impressive. So I think you use that pace and you use that kind of opportunity out wide, especially since Toronto like to commit their wing backs forward.
That's the thing, right? So Morrow and Beitashour get forward. There is then that gap in behind. It'll be Jordan Morris up against. Let's say Jordan Morris plays on the left wing, which is where he mostly has played. I've seen recently for Seattle. Then he'll be up against just Zavaleta. Because there's definitely in a 3-5-2. I mean, even if you just put this formation down on paper, and I know that's not where it lives, you can see the gap between the sort of the right centre back and the right wing back, and the left centre back and the left wing back. Yeah. And then you can imagine a pacey type 1 diabetic forcing his way into that gap.
Yeah. I mean, I think we both read Will Parchman's kind of quick preview right after the conference finals had wrapped up.
TSS seal of approval.
Yeah. And one of his points was basically Montreal were able to make Damaduro look like an MLS All-Star because of how many gaps there were in Toronto's defense and how stretched they were able to make them.
I just thought of a foot race I'd like to see.
Yeah, Freaky Fast 8 versus J-Mo Smooth 13 or something like that. Yeah. And so I think you could probably try to incorporate that into your game plan as well, exploit that space, and use that pace.
The other thing, whenever I see Seattle, I think Nelson Valdez is very good at sort of not just sticking at centre forward and standing around. He comes back, shows back to goal, shows feet, comes really deep, and then Nicolas Ladero goes and fills that space, or Jordan Morris comes in and fills that space. And it's kind of a bit like a carousel of attacking players moving around. And again, it's going to be really complicated for Toronto's back three and defensive midfielders to keep track of exactly who's where and what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's possibly to Seattle's advantage.
Yeah, I agree completely. So have we hyped up Seattle too much? Should we flip it around and talk a little bit about Toronto, or do you want to talk more about Seattle's attack first?
I think we've gone in heavy on Seattle. I think we've explained really well what the threat is. So assuming Toronto can find a way to deal with it, what did Toronto offer going forward?
Okay, well, they've got this guy named Sebastian Giovinco.
Yes.
He's kind of good. He is under 30, which blew my mind when you first told me that. I absolutely thought he was.
Did you just think one of the DP rules was you have to be over 30?
No, I thought because we've known Giovinco for so long, I just thought he was.
He was a promising
30,
teenager, right? He was hyped up when he was 17, 18.
He's real good. So, I mean, they've got Giovinco, obviously, and then they've got Josie Altidore. And
classic big man, little man.
Yeah, and again, to go to the Will Parchman article, he pointed out that it's a strange thing where you have the big man, little man, but you have a not classic way of using them.
It's backwards, right?
Yeah, right?
It's backwards. I think he called it a paradox, which I think is the exact right way to say it.
Because you have Giovinco who stays higher, and then you have Josie Altidore who drops deep.
Yep.
But I think that we have actually stumbled upon a reason why that's the case. Because I had this idea that maybe you could use hack a Josie, which was what was done to the LA Lakers with Shaq. You hack a Shaq, you foul him, you put him...
Keep making him take penalty kicks.
Yeah, that's it. No, just that I think at times in the past we've seen Josie Altidore, when playing for the U.S. national team, can get frustrated. We've seen him get agitated, start yelling at the ref, start yelling at opponents, picking up cards he doesn't need, and his head isn't in the game. So my question was, can you do that to him in this playoff? If you start kicking him, fouling him, does he get angry? And I think the answer was he does, and I think you're the one who came to this conclusion. He does if he's up top by himself and frustrated.
And he's just waiting for service, and only gets it occasionally, and when he does, he gets fouled, then his head goes down and he gets mad. We've seen it happen.
When he doesn't get touches, and then when he finally does, he gets kicked. It's like, really, that was my chance. You guys are jerks, except there's stronger language than that. So I think that partially explains why he's the one dropping deep, because then he's on the ball more.
Yep.
He doesn't feel as isolated. He doesn't feel as disconnected, and he feels, like he's plugged in and can keep playing. And then if he does get fouled, then fine. He's, within free kick range, and he can run in there and get ahead on the end of the ball.
So this has worked for the US national team at times recently, and it's definitely been working for Toronto, is to have Josie come deep and be like amped up. And you see him charging around, getting involved, getting connected. And then if he's getting into physical challenges, bumping around, getting fouled, it's okay, because he's always like, I think it's more like, I think of him as like a big articulated truck, and like once he gets up speed, it's really hard to stop him. So if he's constantly like moving and getting involved,
I can't tell if this is a Britishism or I just don't know things. What is an articulated truck?
I wanted to say lorry, but I'm talking about like the big
like a Mack truck, like an 18-wheeler.
The things that you see on the interstate, an 18-wheeler.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So once he's got
a Mack truck.
Okay, once the Mack truck has a lot of speed, it's really hard to slow it down, right?
I see.
But from a standing start, which is like isolated Josie, it doesn't really get started. So once the adrenaline is like the gasoline flow. This is a very poor metaphor. A
little bit.
But I'm saying, so essentially, once the adrenaline's flowing and Josie's running around, getting involved in things, then it's almost impossible to stop him.
Yeah, I think so, and I think especially what he got out of that Montreal game was that he can be physical, but he doesn't have to be physical, because I think you're going to have bigger, stronger defenders in Seattle, and maybe they can handle Josie's physicality a little bit more.
This is it. Yeah. If he went up against Chad Marshall and Torres and he was trying to win headers, he would lose most of those headers. Chad Marshall is ridiculous in the air, right? I mean, I think it's such a mismatch with Giovinco being up there. Seattle just won't have a long ball to play.
Yeah, I think so.
It'd be crazy if they did.
Yeah. That said, I do want to say regarding Chad Marshall, yes, he's a very good header of the ball, but I do see an opportunity for Toronto on set pieces. Not just because they exploited set pieces pretty effectively against Montreal, but because Colorado in that second leg, 2 or 3 times they had decent opportunities. Jermaine Jones very early on in the first half got a header that he had no business getting, but because everybody was kind of slow to react, it goes just wide of that post. If that goes in, it's a very different game. And so I do think, especially in the cold and potentially bad weather in Toronto, you could see Toronto look to capitalize on maybe some vulnerability on set pieces from Seattle.
And you saw the way Toronto had that clever, Giovinco saying, Josie, go near post, I'm gonna flick it in. And I think I've just realised, I think of Seattle as being great on corners because of Chad Marshall and because of Torres, right? But outside of that, because they don't have a big striker, right? Valdez isn't winning stuff in the air. Morris isn't so much. Ladero isn't. Neither of the fullbacks are, right? Jovan Jones and Tyrone Mears, they're not winning stuff in the air much. So you've really only got those 2 centre-backs winning headers. Maybe Ozzy Alonso as well.
Yeah, and if you're...
it's just a not enough big guys thing.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I think so. But even if with the big guy matchups, I'm wondering if you've got, say, if you're Brian Schmetzer, Seattle coach, and you've got to have Chad Marshall pay attention to one person on a corner or a set piece, what's the percentage likelihood that person is Haglund? Because I feel like it's 100% chance that you see Marshall marking Haglund and vice versa.
Yeah, so Haglund was almost unbeatable on a couple corner kicks.
Including towards his own goal.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, if you have Marshall on Haglund, you have Torres on someone else, then you've still got to worry about Josie Altidore, Michael Bradley, other guys, the other 2 centre-backs, possibly, if they're in there. It's too many big guys.
And that's where I actually DM'd Will Parchman to ask him this very question about the hack a Josie technique, and his response was, if you foul Shaq, he'll miss his free throws. If you foul Josie, you kill yourself on set piece positioning in cards. And that's true, that if you do those fouls in your defensive half, you're in a lot of trouble, because Josie Altidore, amongst others, can win those headers.
Even if they're just serving it from way deep, right? Yeah. So the guy who will be up against Josie, so we talked about Josie not being really up against the centre-backs, he'll come a bit deeper. It looks like it's going to be Josie versus Ozzy Alonso. That's going to be an incredible physical and... I don't know what the word is, like character battle, right?
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because you've got the physicality of both of them. Obviously, you've got the speed and strength of Josie. Ozzy Alonso, not particularly weak himself, but Ozzy Alonso is also very clever in the way he goes into tackles, the way he draws fouls, the way he creates opportunities. And so I think that battle, as you said, for any number of those reasons, is going to be particularly captivating.
What about Roldan? I'm imagining Christian Roldan. We've been really impressed with his sort of passing and all-round game, but I don't see him winning any physical battles with Josie.
I don't, but he's another player who I think that's not necessarily his game. Like, yeah, he can win him. He can be feisty if he wants to be. But he's a player who's been so good that we talked about players who might get caps under Bruce Arena. We failed to mention Roldan, who a lot of people have in their provisional squads.
I think Bruce Arena may even have mentioned Roldan after a Seattle game recently.
And we both have been on that train since the beginning of the season. I'm sure others have been there far sooner than we. But I think
we got a couple stops late.
Yeah, but I think there's a reason because he seems, at least from my layman's perspective when it comes to, I don't watch Seattle day in and day out, so, no offense, Seattle fans. But I would say that he's a player who's so technical on the ball and has that ability to kind of show up in random spots where you don't expect him to pop up, that he's another one that you kind of have to, especially if you're Toronto and worrying about how do we deal with Ladero, he's a player who can then be like, all right, great, double mark him, and now I'm wide open. Thanks for that. I'm rolled down and I've scored.
One thing we haven't talked about too deeply is fullbacks. So, on the Seattle front, Joevin Jones, Tyrone Mears like to get forward. On the Toronto front, you've got wingbacks, and Morrow and Beitashour also love getting forward. Morrow was involved in at least a couple of those Toronto goals against Montreal. So, this is always confusing for me. I don't know who has the advantage. Is it the team that is getting their fullbacks forward, or are they taking a huge gamble and risking things going the other way?
I guess it's the team who can force you into reacting is maybe the team who's successful, right? Because if you both try to go...
that's always true, I guess.
If you both go attacking and one of you then resolves to be defensive because of that,
yeah,
then that's like a mid-game adjustment, which means that something's not going right. That said, both of these teams have proven themselves very effective on the break. So you could also see both of them expecting their counterparts to be attacking, and then somebody sits back, invites that pressure, gets their opponent stretched, and then counters quickly. So you could also see that switch up as well.
I'm going to go advantage Seattle. And here's why. It's mostly just because of Toronto's formation, right? The 3-5-2.
You're talking about just in terms of attacking fullbacks or in terms of overall game?
In this specific, just about attacking fullbacks, but it applies to the overall game, obviously. Just because you can have Joevin Jones and Jordan Morris going down the left, and you've only technically got one wing back in Beitashour, right? So assuming Jones gets forward with Morris, you're going to have to then drag someone over to help Beitashour, right? Probably the right centre-back, maybe one of the central midfielders, but as soon as someone's out there to help, then you've also got all those other problems that we talked about, like tracking Ladero, tracking Valdez coming deep, tracking Roldan coming through. So I feel like that could be the thing that unbalances everything. Yeah. It's just if Toronto get pulled to one side because Seattle have like a double team down a wing.
Yeah. And I'll say this much then. Like, we've watched enough soccer to be able to kind of get rough ideas of what the rhythms and patterns are going to be of games. We've watched enough of both of these teams, I think, to do that. With how much we've watched these two teams with other teams, I think we could get a good idea of what each coach is going to want to do and how they should approach this game. Yeah. I think you could hear in the way that when you asked me about how do you defend Nico Ladero, there's lots of theoretical ideas, but I don't know if any of them are necessarily going to work. And Greg Vandy is a far more intelligent soccer coach than I, so he was going to have probably some different ideas.
He doesn't sound it when the mic picks him up, but he definitely knows what he's doing.
It's the high-pitched screaming, I think. That doesn't really help. And so I guess what I'm getting at, though, is that this game, I think that's why it's so captivating. For me as a neutral, it's just because there's so many different ways that these teams could approach it. And it's not even like, well, they've played a 3-5-2, but they've also played a 3-4-3 and a 4-3-3. So
it's not just numbers, right?
It's just like you kind of know roughly what they're going to do, but there's going to be so many little wrinkles and iterations in there that I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. And I feel like it's going to be the type of game that will be very interesting to watch, not just the first time, but also the second time and the third time and so on, because it's going to be so many.
I'm not watching it more than 3 times.
5 times it is.
One top-level thing that we talked about is the idea of Seattle playing the ball out of the back. Right? Because you've got, say, Valdez, not a big aerial presence up front, so you can't just bang long balls at Valdez, right? Maybe the only good, like, longish ball is some sort of diagonal for Jordan Morris to chase, but mostly Seattle will try and play out of the back. I know Toronto also like to try and press, so it's going to be that classic, like, is your pressing better than our passing or vice versa? Yeah,
and I think you'll see that very early on with goal kicks. Yeah, my guess would be on that first goal kick, expect to see Stefan Frei kind of standing there and then doing that everybody go forward gesture, because you're going to have Toronto pushed up. Yeah, because they do want to play short out of the back off of goal kicks and then try to build quickly. And I think a big part of that is because you then force the other team to come in after you've already played that ball. So they come and try to press you, but now they're going to be more stretched. Maybe the back line steps, Jordan Morris can be behind, and even if he can't, you're going to have gaps in the middle that can be exploited.
Okay, and if you're Toronto, you don't want your gaps exploited.
Nope.
That's the last thing you want.
No, for many different reasons, yes.
How do you stop that happening? How do you get Fry waving his arms when he's got the ball, not being able to have the short pass?
So if it's Barcelona, for example, or excuse me, if it's Man City now, a couple teams ago,
Guardiola
wants them to play out of the back with a goalkeeper. So kind of
do or die,
no matter what, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if that's what Seattle are going to do. I think they want to do it because usually it means the other team isn't paying attention. You can get the ball back into play. Now the other team has to react. So I think if you're Toronto, if you show them, hey, we're aware that you're trying to do that, if you send maybe Josie Altidore or maybe Giovinco forward, and you kind of take away that, like if Josie Altidore is standing at the top of the box, cheating over to the side that the goal kick's being taken, then it kind of removes the attractiveness of that option. And that's what Colorado did to Seattle time and time again in that playoff round, is they would send two guys forward, and then Fry would say, never mind, I'm just going to kick it long, and everybody would have to go back up and try to win the header.
So you're saying just some good, quick thinking, like defensive-minded thinking from, say, Josie and Gio could cut out the pass for Seattle?
Yeah.
All right, and then what does Seattle do instead? They kick it long?
I mean, basically, that's what you have to do at that point, right? I mean, if you can't just wait and see if they retreat. You've kind of got to kick it long and see if you can win a contested header or win the 50-50 ball that results.
And going back to what you were saying earlier then, the key for Toronto is don't get stretched.
Right.
Don't get stretched.
I mean, that's the big thing, right? You want to stay relatively compact, but you essentially don't want to be in a situation when you're not paying attention. Fry plays the ball out wide. Now Josie and Giovinco have to come and try to shut that down. But now two other Seattle players have come, so now you have to send more midfield players forward. You have to send your wingbacks forward, and suddenly you've got 4 or 5 players committed. You've got your 4 or 5 defenders back. There's a big gap in the middle. Daryl standing right there, and then you've got problems.
You can guarantee he'll be running in one of those spaces, right? Because he's always running, always looking for space.
Exactly.
So I feel like we've gone pretty deep there on several tactical ideas and how they match up. I really do think that it comes down to a lot of sort of almost 1v1 matchups, or like how certain players are dealt with.
Okay.
So as a quick summary, what would you say, like if people have maybe zoned out halfway through this conversation, which I hope you haven't, I hope you're paying attention, but you're watching MLS Cup on Saturday, what are the sort of key things to keep an eye on? What should people be watching for on Saturday, Taylor?
So if you're talking about 1v1 matchups, then it's probably Josie versus Ozzy. You want to see how that matchup plays out. I think I'm not going to say a 1v1 matchup because I don't think it will be, but maybe how do you deal with Ladero would be another one.
Yes, that's going to be a question of how do they try and deal with Ladero, right? Is it Will Johnson? Is it Michael Bradley? Is it just pass him around everybody?
And then I think who better uses or exploits the space out wide, because you are going to have those people cheating forward a little bit, so there are going to be gaps in behind. Which team can use their pace and skill and technical ability to punish the other?
Does Jordan Morris find the gap between the wing-back and the centre-back?
Or Giovinco, if you're a TFC fan.
Or Giovinco. Yeah, it's the same. It's different positionally, but it's the same sort of thing, right? Because we talked about how he won't win any balls in the air against, say, Chad Marshall. But if he gets the ball on the ground and he's up against Chad Marshall, I know which tiny Italian man I'd be putting my money on.
Yeah, I think it was Matt Doyle. I heard talking about how like this game actually kind of suits him because you don't want to be in a physical battle.
Yeah.
You want like Giovinco, who will be winning free kicks if he gets into a physical battle, or kind of shredding defenders who are maybe a step slower than he is.
Is that a weird advantage when you're so like height-wise and chunky, muscly-wise outmatched by defenders that it's not even a contest, it's completely off the table, that you're not even going to try it? It's almost good to have that option closed down for you because you're not going to be put in a battle that you're going to lose.
Yeah, I mean, that's number one. But number two is just that, I mean, we've been in those games before where a little player will go up against a big player. Even if the big player wins the ball cleanly, if the little player goes flying, it's going to be a free kick almost always. So there's that element to it as well.
There might be a Giovinco free kick from outside the box. What else did we mention that people need to look? Maybe Hagland on corner kicks is definitely one to keep an eye on.
Yep.
And maybe that's it. That's enough to keep your eyes on, right? You've only got two.
So.
You've only got two, and they tend to track together.
Yeah, exactly. So I think 5 things to track with 2 eyes is good enough.
All right, so the game, once again, is Saturday. I believe it's an 8 o'clock Eastern kickoff. It's in freezing Toronto, Ontario. Is I believe what the city's called.
Or Ontario, either one.
And it's British Commonwealth. We pronounce it how I say.
Sure.
And the game is on Big Fox.
Yeah, Big Fox or Unimas in the United States, TSN or RDS, whatever that may be in Canada.
All right, Taylor, later on today's show, 3 things coming up. We are going to talk all about tifo. We have a listener question about tifo. We've got the TSS Scouting Network. We've got 3 reports. And we're going to have a little look at Christian Pulisic and how he did in Borussia Dortmund's trip to Real Madrid. No spoilers on the score. until we get there. But first, today's show is sponsored by SeatGeek. SeatGeek has made buying tickets online for sports and concert less confusing than it used to be.
That's right. So you can download the app. You can look at maybe venues close to you if you're looking for something specifically in your city, or if there's a major event, say MLS Cup 2016.
Which sold out in 3 minutes, I believe.
It did. So then you can search for that as well.
So SeatGeek, it's a ticket aggregator, so you can find all the tickets being sold, including people who are reselling tickets. So, for example, MLS Cup, yes, it's sold out, but if I open the SeatGeek app, I search ML, it auto-completes to MLS, and I can find MLS Cup, pull it up, and I can see which tickets are available for Saturday's game. If you want to download the SeatGeek app, you can do that in your app store, Google Play or iTunes. Download the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab and click add a promo code, enter promo code TSS, then they know that we sent you. And then you'll get a $20 rebate off the first ticket purchase that you make.
There we are. So download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code TSS today.
All right, Taylor, a listener question for you. Justin Miller has emailed to ask something that I believe is very...
You've gone very dramatic here.
It's very MLS Cup specific. Yeah, I'm hyping it up. So actually, Justin didn't specifically ask about MLS Cup, but I think it's applicable.
Yeah.
Justin says, what is a tifo? What does tifo stand for? And what's the background of them? Justin says, I've heard you mention them several times, and conceptually, I think they're basically giant banners teams hold up before games. Checks out. But that's all I know. I'd be interested in the history of tifo, and if each of you has a favourite of all the ones you've seen.
Sure. All right. So do you want to have a guess as to what it means, where it comes from?
You say that as if you know the answer.
I do. I've done the research.
You've done the research. Okay. So I don't think tifo stands for anything, first of all. I don't think it's an acronym.
Okay.
Is that a yes or a no?
I guess we'll find out, won't we?
My guess is that it's an Italian word, because I think of this sort of culture starting with like Italian ultras.
Yep.
And basically, yes, they are giant banners that fans hold up to support their team.
So you're sort of right in the sense that it's Italian, but tifo does not mean banner. It doesn't mean anything relating to banner, in fact. What it actually means is fans. Tifosi in Italian is fans.
Of course. I knew that.
It's basically been co-opted into meaning these big things because that's one of the things the ultras that you mentioned would utilize to show their fandom.
Right.
But if you want to go even more literally, tifosi is what the root word is.
It's a Dothraki word, right?
Well, think about it for a second. Is there something that sounds like tifa, like typha, maybe?
No.
Yeah, there is. It literally means those infected by typhus. And I'm assuming that's because...
Oh, like fevered.
Exactly. I'm assuming that's because the fans were so rabid that they were looked as though they were infected with some sort of disease.
Wait, is this a theory that you found while researching, or is this a Taylor Rockwell original?
That is the etymology of the word tifosi. So
okay, this isn't a TB Rock conspiracy.
Yeah, so it essentially refers to the phenomenon of supporting a sports team. But I think part of that, as I said, was ultras having these giant banners, and then I think it basically, in the Western world, became a... Tifo is a large banner or some sort of choreographed showing of fandom, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you have other ones in there. Like, I didn't realize there was a specific term for when all the fans have an individual card that they hold up, and that makes the stadium. Yeah, there's it's like showing cards, or I forget what it's called, but there's lots of different terms for being a fan that I was not aware were like technical terms.
Got it. So the actual banner is not really tifo, but it sort of has come to mean that because that's the sort of usual form of expression.
There you go.
I think we'll have some good ones at MLS Cup.
I would venture to guess
especially
we will.
With Seattle fans being there, Toronto fans being at home. Someone's got it, and it's a special occasion, right? The fans will have put in a lot of work behind the scenes, thinking up good tifo displays for this game.
Second part of that question, though, do you have a favorite, Mr. Grove?
The one that always comes to mind is, I looked this up, it was the Columbus Crew fans had a banner. It was basically insulting an opposition team. It's when they played Sporting KC, and it was Ralph Wiggum saying, "I'm a Sporting." Which made me laugh.
Kind of brutal.
So it was sort of laughing at the name Sporting, which I think a lot of people sort of joked around with at the time, right? Because it was like a European-inflected Sporting Club de Portugal type thing. Now it just feels normal. Now it feels good. So I'm not insulting Sporting KC at all.
Alrighty.
Solid. But I think it's just, I loved that it was one of those nonsensical Ralph Wiggum phrases writ large on a banner that made me chuckle.
That works. From mine, I'll go with, you can probably find it on YouTube. There's a great one from the Galatasaray-Fenerbahce derby a few years back, and the entire stadium has those, like the colored cards, so they look like it's Galatasaray's colors.
Yeah.
And then I think you had a giant tifo of Fatih Terim and another one that was a giant lion, I believe it was, and then they both kind of moved around the stadium a little bit, which is always nice to see the tifos move.
I love it.
Or they were raised slowly as well. They kind of grew out of the fans.
I'm going to call it a dynamic tifo when it's like an action happening, even if it's like a sun rising or something like that happens. Yeah. I'm really excited about that too.
Yeah, I think didn't Portland do one where like Dorothy was walking along the yellow brick road? I'm pretty sure there was something like that a while back. Yeah.
Any others that you remember fondly?
There was not like specifically, obviously, since I can't even remember what it was, but I'm pretty sure one of the Milan teams did like the world's largest one ever, and it took months to prepare, and I'm pretty sure it was an insult. Like it was like a former player had returned and they weren't too pleased. Although it might have been in praise of Maldini. It was either praising Maldini or insulting somebody, but it was a pretty big one and pretty good.
Those are your two options.
There you go, yeah.
I would say it's not a thing that I was too familiar with before coming to the US because we don't do it in England. Some people just hang a flag over the side.
Isn't that because being like passionate about your team is illegal in England?
It's an English reserve, right?
Well, no, I just thought it was like you're not allowed to stand at certain times. Don't you get like thrown out in certain stadiums if you're standing too much?
Yeah, well, because those stadiums, it's because of the Taylor report from the 90s that stadiums are all-seater, so standing is kind of discouraged.
Lord Taylor to you, my friend.
Standing is kind of discouraged. But even before that, there wasn't a lot of tifo. It's just not an English thing. Maybe it's too cold.
Yeah, that could be. That could be, yeah. You're just sitting there with your teas and your prawn sandwiches.
And I think it's just maybe an expression thing, as in, I think of like Italian fans as more expressive, just English people in general, more reserved. It's more stiff upper lip than holding up a banner.
I see.
If you have a favourite tifo, tweet it to us at Total Soccer Show, because I would love to have a timeline full of awesome tifos. Yeah?
It raises the question, though. If you have one awesome tifo, it's an awesome tifo. If you have 400 awesome tifos, are they still all awesome, or does it kind of bring it down a little bit?
We're not grading on a curve.
All right, cool. There we are. Then they all remain awesome.
We're grading on a flag.
Well done.
Speaking of awesome, Taylor, today we have 3 reports from Le Soccer Show Network Scouting.
Oh, you've made a tremendous mistake here.
There's all kinds of weird phrases in there. The Total Soccer Show Scouting Network, we have 3 reports about promising young players. First up, Taylor, is a report from Andrew Eggleton. Andrew Eggleton is scouting Ryan Gold, the 20-year-old Scottish midfielder for Vitoria FC. He's on loan from the aforementioned Sporting Club de Portugal.
Not Sporting.
Not sporting
Okay, cool.
So Andrew says that Gold has been limited to cameo appearances in Portuguese league play, but has had a greater impact in the League Cup. He's got a considerable minutes and even set up a few goals, which is admirable. However, I think Andrew deserves special praise. This is Taylor talking. For his diligent efforts to translate Portuguese language soccer sites.
Basically, that's where he's getting his reports, is having to go in and find Portuguese language news and then translate it. I'm not sure if he speaks much Portuguese, so it might be that he's using some Google Translate. Right. Either way, that can be, in and of itself, another language.
Well, he's doing better than I just did trying to translate Total Soccer Show Scouting Network into Esperanto.
Good job. Next report comes from Michael Fisk, scouting Andreas Christensen, the 20-year-old Danish defender for Borussia Mönchengladbach. Christensen started at the heart of Gladbach's defense as they fell 4-1 to Dortmund, their fellow Borussians.
I did see this called the Borussia Derby.
Exactly. It was a mixed bag for the young defender as he made several good plays, but was also made to look foolish on several occasions, most notably by Ousmane Dembele.
He's only human.
That said, it was also the entire team. When you lose 4-1, looks a little bit silly. After qualifying for the Champions League last season, Gladbach are now 14th in the Bundesliga and sit only 5 points clear of the relegation zone. Ooh. Not ideal for the Foals? Question mark? There we are. All right, cool.
No. Borussia Mönchengladbach? Yes, the Foals.
There we
go. Yeah. Okay. Final report is from Charles McHugh. He's scouting promising young Englishman Trent Alexander-Arnold. Charles says, young Trent was on the bench but did not play in Liverpool's 4-3 loss to Bournemouth, which is maybe a good thing for him. He did, however, start at right-back against Leeds in the Carling Cup. Is that what it's called? It's not anymore, is it? The League Cup, the EFL Cup. Yeah. And registered a lovely assist for a Divock Origi opening goal in Liverpool's 2-0 win. Oh, I saw this. It was a cross from deep.
So that's all the scouting reports today, correct?
Well, it wasn't an official scouting
report.
Question. Wendy Thomas tweeted us to let us know that Christian Pulisic was starting for Dortmund today away to Real Madrid.
So was Solratis.
There was a Borussia Dortmund typo in the lineup.
I'm just saying, the other German teams have taken other people to task for getting things wrong and questioning spelling. Yeah, exactly. You got to be on point, Borussia Dortmund.
So, just to set this up, Borussia Dortmund, I think, led at the top of the group going into this. All they needed was a draw away to Real Madrid or a win, just to avoid defeat at the Bernabeu to finish top of their Champions League group and keep Real Madrid in second. Real Madrid went 2-0 up.
They did.
Real Madrid went 2-0 up with Christian Pulisic starting on the right wing. One of the goals was kind of Christian Pulisic's fault.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Benzema's
tough because
goal,
a
right?
lot of things went wrong. So basically, he tries to close down like a loose ball sort of in the middle of the field, about maybe 35, 40 yards from Dortmund's goal, and then kind of loses that challenge. But again, it's going to be tough for him to win anyway. Then has to get back to try to cover Marcelo.
And he does track back, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so he covers Marcelo. Marcelo drops the ball, continues his run. Pulisic tracks him, and then I think basically hands Marcelo off
To his buddy, Felix
Felix
Passlack, his best friend in the whole world.
Yeah, and then tries to get to James Rodriguez. James Rodriguez is the one who then, having received the pass from Marcelo, plays the ball in. Karim Benzema heads it home.
Yeah, so it's a James cross from the left to Benzema's head. I think James sells Pulisic and sends him the wrong way.
Yep, absolutely.
You agree?
Because, as I said, Pulisic was tracking Marcelo, and then you can see him tell Passlack clearly, like, you pick him up, I'm going to go to James.
I'll take care of this.
And then I think in trying to close down that gap, because James is a few yards ahead of him and a few yards wider, Pulisic's closing it down, and I think James just does a little bit of a shimmy and makes Pulisic think he's cutting back inside.
Tiniest movement,
and
it's
so
the tiniest movement.
Young Christian holds up his run, and then James accelerates away and then plays that ball in. So he bites a little bit on that move, and it leads to a goal. That said, Karim Benzema was wide open despite having two people paying attention to him. So there's also the element of, is it the guy who played the ball or is it the guy who scores the goal who's probably more to blame if you're the defender? And I'd say it's probably, if you're not tracking the guy who scores, you're in trouble.
I think we're paying more attention to Pulisic's role because we're a US-based show than, say, a Borussia Dortmund podcast would be. The German one.
Said, I'm pretty sure the Dortmund goalkeeper got up after that goal and angrily screamed in the general direction of Christian Pulisic. So it might have been just that he was angry about the kind of defensive lapses all over the field.
That sounds bad.
Yeah. Who's to say? But things got better. Things did get
so yeah, it was 2-0 to Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. At this point, you would bet your life on them seeing this out, right?
I mean, we turned it off. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, that was because we had to record. But at that point, we were both like, oh, that's a shame. Oh, well.
Yeah. So we went back and
second place
is
is fine
afterwards. Real Madrid, Dortmund's first goal happens with Pulisic on the field. He is.
That's where we are with this.
Somewhat involved. So he's not. He doesn't get the assist or anything like that. It's a longish spell of possession. It includes the ball going out to Pulisic on the right wing and him doing that thing he does a lot, which is just play a one-time ball back where it came from, and then Dortmund go all around to the other side. Right?
Yeah,
It's just that quick moving the ball left to right. Okay. So then they score. I can't remember if it's Aubameyang or Royce. Either way, it's 2-1. Pulisic comes off. He is replaced by his Turkish nemesis,
Emre Mor.
He's not really, but he's a competition for one of the young winger spots, right?
Yep.
The equalising goal for Borussia Dortmund comes in the 88th minute. It's a Real Madrid ill-advised attack. It's Marcelo accelerating down the left, and who puts a great tackle in on Marcelo? But young Emre Mor.
Yeah, he does.
It's really good, right? He stops Marcelo in his tracks, takes the ball, then plays some bizarre through ball. It threads the needle, ends up in behind Ramos for Aubameyang to run onto. Aubameyang accelerates. Aubameyang squares it. I think, again, I'm getting my players confused. It's either Schürrle or Royce scores.
Royce, I believe.
It's Royce scores the equaliser. So, no Pulisic on the field for the dramatic, fun equalising goal. And I was kind of weirdly heartbroken about that when I found out at the time. But in the end, you realise, he's part of this team.
Yeah.
And they've just tied 2-2 at the Bernabeu. And they've topped their Champions League group.
Indeed.
So, headline here, Christian Pulisic, Champions League group topper.
I'd say maybe Borussia Dortmund, Champions League group topper. Christian Pulisic, subheader, also involved. Yeah.
In the US edition of this newspaper. That's
a little bit.
That's the subheader.
Yeah.
And we were looking into round of 16 matchups,
right.
And it's looking good for Dortmund, right?
I mean, in the sense that they can't get anybody from the group they come out of, which means they can't get Real Madrid, and you can't get a German team, I believe, which means you're not going to get Bayer Leverkusen, who finished second, or more importantly, Bayern Munich, who finished second.
So you can't play your own nationality, which is interesting, right?
Yeah. And then if you look at the teams that won their group, that's Arsenal, Juve. There's a big one in there. Barcelona would be the other one.
So you avoid all those?
Yeah, so that means you could still get a team like, for example, Man City.
Yes.
Which could be a little bit difficult.
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm right in thinking that is the toughest possible draw on paper for Borussia Dortmund when these round of 16 draws come out.
Yes, I think that's correct. So, and I think City are mathematically one of the teams they're more likely to draw. It's City and Sevilla, who I would say is probably the other really
also
tough
pretty
team.
Tough,
yeah.
right? But again, they're not Bayern Munich or Real Madrid.
This is very true.
So...
Yeah.
So good news for Borussia Dortmund. We'll be watching, of course, the Champions. We would have been watching Champions League round of 16 anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
Now we'll be watching extra hard.
I did enjoy. I think Bayern tweeted at the official Arsenal account and just said, "Should we book our tickets now?" Like, I think there's some expectation that Arsenal and Bayern Munich are just destined to draw each other.
Just because it feels that way.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like this was the worst possible year for Arsenal to win their Champions League group.
It does feel that way, right?
Because this time the second place teams they can get are Real Madrid and Bayern Munich.
That said, statistically, one of the most probable draws is Barcelona-Bayern Munich. So that could be kind of interesting.
I would also watch that.
Yeah.
I guess we have to make sure there's plenty of space in the DVR.
I want to say again, when I say statistically probable, that's like there's a 25% chance as opposed to, say, a 12% chance.
Right. It is, it's ultimately a random draw.
City
right?
Atletico also pretty high in probability.
All right. I want it to be Champions League round of 16 already. Okay, if you would like to join the Total Soccer Show Scouting Network, you can go to totalsoccershow.com/subscribe. All the information is there.
And thank you to @SoccerObserve on Twitter for sending us those probabilities. I'm not sure where they came from, but they helped us figure things out.
We both frantically pulled that effort in the last minute to get a quick look
Credit
at
to you. You pulled it up. I just kind of stared blankly at my screen. So yeah, credit to you.
You look good doing it, though.
Oh,
you look good doing it. All right, Taylor, we'll be back with more MLS coverage. I'm telling you, you already know. I'm really telling our listeners. Tomorrow, we'll have an interview with Alexi Lalas, who has been sort of traveling the United States promoting MLS Cup, so we'll be hearing all about that.
There we are.
Until then, Taylor Rockwell, thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.